One evening of late as I happened to stray to the county Tipperary, I straight took my way to dig the potatoes and work by the day for a farmer called Darby O'Leary. I asked him how far we were bound for to go, the night being dark and the cold wind did blow. I was hungry and tired and my spirits were low, for I'd got neither whiskey nor water.
Rawr, I'm a scary dinosaur. Do you know what kind of dinosaur I am? Your mom. So I was at the grocery store the other day, and my eyes beheld this. What the fuck? You know, when I was a kid, I remember those Apple Jacks commercials they had on TV with the Rastafarian cinnamon stick and the fugly apple. I mean, both of these guys were extremely fugly, but that's what gave them their charm, you know? They were ugly, but they were fun. But I knew they weren't long for this world. I knew that in this modern age where skeuomorphism is a thing of the past and everything's becoming flat and clean, these out-of-place misfits, they just weren't going to last in this modern climate. So something had to change. These Ren and Stimpy mutants from the planet X needed to be gotten rid of. But could they not have come up with anything better than this? Wow!
It's time for the RAB Roundup!
You can think of that as like my tongue. You know how lizards have long tongues? Or you can think of it as I'm a dragon and I'm breathing fire at you. I saw this video the other day called Steamed Hams, but it was banned in the USSR. Now, for those of you who don't know, the Steamed Hams meme is basically this clip from The Simpsons of Principal Skinner feeding Krusty Burgers to Superintendent Chalmers, but trying to disguise them as his own cooking. It's a very funny bit, very clever, but a few years ago, it really took off as a meme and people kept doing different versions of it. But the key word in all this is a few years ago, which is interesting to me. The reason I'm bringing this up is because steamed hams has had a longevity that I don't think I've ever seen in a meme of this type. For years, nonstop, for like 5 years now, people have been continuously making new iterations of steamed hams. This has a few ramifications. Does it mean that the internet time is slowing down? Or does it mean that steamed hams is such an exceptional meme that it can outsurvive any other meme in its path? But I like this USSR one because it's like if Fantastic Planet meets the cabinet of Dr. Caligari, but with steamed hams. And speaking of the cabinet of Dr. Caligari, I totally forgot to mention the fact that there was actually, seriously, a German expressionist version of steamed hams. I can't believe I forgot all about this. I brought up the cabinet of Dr. Caligari because there's some cubist imagery at the beginning of this more Fantastic Planet-based steamed hams video, the banned in the USSR one. I don't know, maybe it's based on some like Russian animated films from the 20th century. I don't really know anything about that kind of genre, but seriously, there is there is a German expressionist version of steamed hams. Check it out. Next, I want to talk about Cenk Uygur. Why, you might ask? Has Cenk Uygur said anything interesting lately? No. I don't know when was the last time he said something interesting. The real reason I want to talk about Cenk Uygur is that I like Cenk Uygur. Not in the semi-ironic way that I like Ben Shapiro. I expressed that on the last episode of RAB Roundup. No, I like Cenk Uygur. Like, I seriously like him as a person. I think he's an extremely likable guy. And the reason this is noteworthy is that I seem to be the only person on Earth who feels this way. Everyone else seems to think he is a thoroughly unlikable person, but I somehow have not fallen victim to that perception. And you know, the fact that he is a politically charged YouTuber or journalist, what is he, TV? He used to be on MSNBC, I know that. Whatever he is, the fact that he's extremely politically charged and politically polarizing as a result, that doesn't really factor into why I like him. I just like him because he's the kind of guy you'd want to hang out with. At least, I would. Am I weird? I like his little catchphrases. Of course! Of course!
Of course! Of course! Of course! Of course! Of course! Of course!
And then he's always like, have at it, hoss. Or he likes to do the Spanish one, no mas, no mas. I don't know, he just seems like a really funny, nice, I guess, guy. He's nice if you don't do anything to pick on him. And he's smart, I think. To be honest, I don't even watch The Young Turks. And if I do watch The Young Turks, I'm watching it just so that I can watch Cenk. But it seems that the demographic that the Young Turks is most popular among is surprisingly not American liberals, but instead American conservatives. I'm serious. Go to any Young Turks video on YouTube and you'll see in the comments nothing but conservatives. It seems like all of the traffic that the Young Turks get on YouTube now is entirely from conservatives coming to hate the videos. But if you hate these videos so much, why do you continue to watch them? I'm wondering if on some level conservatives actually like watching the Young Turks. And perhaps, although they're not likely to admit it, perhaps part of the reason they like it so much is because they like Cenk Uygur. But hey, that's just a theory.
A game theory.
Nope. I will not have any MatPat in this establishment. Look me in the eyes. Okay, some people don't like the fact that he denied the Armenian genocide in the past. Well, that makes me like him even more. Not the fact that he denied the Armenian genocide, but that he had a learning experience from denying the Armenian genocide in the past, because he is, after all, a Turk. Not a young Turk anymore, but he was when he made that claim. I like people who grow. I like people who change their minds.
We're against Saudi Arabia, you dumbass!
I also would recommend checking out the interview that he did with his father, the original Young Turk, who is definitely not young anymore. That'll give you an interesting insight into what it was like to be a Turk back in the 1950s or whenever. Dude doesn't even know his own birthday. That's how old school he is. And I also happen to have it on good authority that Cenk Uygur is a fan of the movie Gladiator, which brings me to my next topic, a new Joaquin Phoenix Ridley Scott production about none other than the famous Napoleon Bonaparte. Now, Napoleon Bonaparte is my favorite historical figure, so I'm definitely going to see this movie. And Joaquin Phoenix actually is one of the names I had in mind for a while, thinking of who would be a good person to play Napoleon. But I concluded, I think, that he was maybe a little bit too old to play Napoleon. Because he is 48, and Napoleon died when he was 51, so... And I mean, look... He's got such a baby face. There's a shortage of baby-faced actors who are actually good at acting. But Napoleon is also described as being very gaunt and thin and bony in his early years. And so I think Joaquin Phoenix can accomplish that very well. And if you put on enough makeup, you can actually give a convincing impression that this 48-year-old man is a 27-year-old man who is just looking like the weather hasn't done him very well. But there's a couple things that I'm concerned about with this movie. One thing is that I think in order to do the Napoleon story justice, you have to either do it like on a Lord of the Rings scale where it's three-hour movies long, or you have to do like a 10-part or 12-part miniseries about it. The one Napoleon adaptation that I have seen in its entirety is the A&E adaptation, which had John Malkovich as Talleyrand, which is just a perfect role for him because that character is just so kind of smarmy, and John Malkovich plays it perfectly. And I actually think that the guy playing Napoleon played him very well, but he was just too old. He was not convincing at all as the young Napoleon. The woman playing Josephine, however, was perfect because she's that right, because Josephine was kind of supposed to be like an older lady anyway. She's like 37, 38 when she married Napoleon, who was like 7 years younger than her, and she was excellent. But two problems I had with that series were, one, it tried to compress the entire Napoleon story into like 3 or 4 episodes, which is just, it felt extremely compressed, extremely rushed. It didn't get to explore really what made Napoleon so amazing. And it spent too much of that runtime focusing on his relationship with Josephine, which it's interesting, but like if you only have this tiny amount of time to tell the story, I don't want you to spend the whole thing on this boring, or it's not boring, but on this melodrama, which gets boring once you realize that there are so many more interesting things happening just outside the, just walk outside the door. Look, there's the door right there. I know I'm pointing at a bookshelf, but imagine there's a door right here. You could walk outside and see so many amazing things, but instead you're focusing on the indoor domesticity of Napoleon and his wife, who loves him, but he loves her at first and she doesn't love him, and then eventually he has to divorce her even though she's grown to love him. It's like some, it's whatever, it's Jane Austen melodrama, but it's fine, but like, God, is there nothing else that you found worthy of focusing on? And so that's what's worrying me about this Ridley Scott movie, is that from the tiny little non-synopsis that I've read that they've released, it says that it's going to focus on Napoleon's rise to power through the lens of his relationship with Josephine. And I'm just hoping that doesn't mean that we're going to be focusing on Josephine in lieu of all the so many interesting things that Napoleon did while the Josephine story was happening. And also, rise to power, what does that mean? Are we going to get Napoleon's whole story when they say rise to power? Are we going to get like the whole thing? Or is it just literally going to be the rise to power? So much happens during the rise to power, during him being a lieutenant to him being emperor, that even just that, up to 1804, is too much to tell in a single story, especially if you're focusing so much of that runtime on Josephine. So basically what I'm getting at is that there is no way this is going to be a definitive Napoleon movie experience, which is unfortunate because I don't know at this rate if we're ever going to get a definitive Napoleon movie experience. I just don't even know if anybody has the will to accomplish that. A lot of people talk about that Stanley Kubrick Napoleon movie that he wanted to make, and he never got around to making it because Waterloo was such a big flop, and so he made Barry Lyndon instead. Look, Stanley Kubrick was excellent in a technical sense, and actually, he's not horrible in a storytelling sense either. Like, 2001: A Space Odyssey is one of my top 20 favorite movies of all time, and Eyes Wide Shut was also an amazing movie. So, like, he's not bad as a storyteller at all. But, like, I've read maybe, like, 25% of his Napoleon script, and I found that it suffers from the problem of being rushed. It's too rushed. I don't think it really would have been a good Napoleon movie. I honestly don't. I just think people way underestimate how long the Napoleon story really is. For a guy who died when he was 51, he had an amazingly dense public life. And you can make the argument, well, why do we have to see everything that Napoleon did? Why can't we just get the highlights? Because in order to understand why the highlights are so interesting and so important, you have to be with him on the journey. You have to see how he got there. Otherwise, it's just like, oh yeah, this is meant to be. This is history. This is a story of something that happened in history where a great man did this or that or blah, 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 blah. And you wonder why people rail against the concept of great man history these days, because they don't understand what makes men like this so great. It's the journey. It is every step along the way for him going from lieutenant to emperor. That is where the story is at. And that is not a short story, but it is so worth telling. Okay, I think I've talked about Napoleon enough. Let's see what else is on the list. So there was this one time where I was sitting outside on the patio. It was a nice brick patio. I was sitting there, just, I don't know, contemplating death. And then this insect comes along. It just appears. It just suddenly appears on the armrest of my chair. And it's got wings. It's about, that big. A small little insect. And it's there. I'm looking at it for a little while. And then it just starts to go crazy. It starts to spaz out. Right? And when a human being spazzes out, when a human being starts to shake and tremble, this is kind of what it looks like. Right? But when an insect does it, it's 10 times as crazy. It's like... And insects will they'll go all around the place. Like it was sitting on this, like, I don't know, 5-inch armrest, and it was just going the entire breadth of this armrest, spazzing out all over the place. It couldn't keep itself contained. So I was just watching this insect spazzing. By the way, spaz in Great Britain is an extremely offensive word. So British listeners, enjoy this story. It was spazzing out, going out of control. And then it fell off of the armrest onto the brick patio below. And then it was just completely dead instantly. Like it was gone. The soul had left its body as soon as it hit the ground. And then, in a matter of 1 or 2 seconds, it was seriously this tight. An ant, about half the size of this bug, comes along, picks it up, and carries it away. I don't really have anything to say about that story. I don't really have a point to make. It's just something that happened years ago that I've never forgotten because it's just such a memorable experience. I suppose if I do have one point to make, it's that if you spend a lot of time outside doing gardening work or whatever you're doing, you end up, if you're like me, paying a lot of attention to the insects and the other creatures of similar size. And you start noticing things about them. Like, I remember gardening a lot with worms. I would notice that different worms had different personalities. Like, it's interesting. If you shrink yourself down a bit, go to that microscopic level and observe life from that level, it can, I don't know, it can provide some sort of insights into the world. Or at least connect you with the world in a way that you never were before. I've been watching a lot of the Gong Show lately. Gene, the dancing machine! The reason I've been watching The Gong Show is because I saw this. I've been trying to round off all of my Charlie Kaufman knowledge. So I'm reading Charlie Kaufman's novel, Antkind, which is 700 pages long. And I've been watching all of his movies. I finished watching all Kaufman movies, and probably the most forgettable, weakest one was a movie about Chuck Barris, the creator and host of The Gong Show. And it was directed by George Clooney, starring Sam Rockwell and Drew Barrymore. And it's one of these movies I'd never heard of, and it seems to have just kind of flown under the radar, and nobody saw it, and it didn't make any money. I've heard that Charlie Kaufman said that George Clooney changed a lot of his script to the point where he kind of disowns that script. And if that's true, then it shows, because this is the least Kaufman movie that I've ever seen. And well, I guess that exists because I've seen them all at this point. But the weird thing about this movie, about Chuck Barris, it's based on a book that Barris wrote in 1984, where he claims that he was a CIA assassin all the while he was making these game shows. But the funny thing is that later that year, in 1984, he was on the Regis Philbin show, and he just admitted that everything he wrote in that book was fake, that he never was a CIA agent.
Now tell me about this book, Chuck. The guy here sounds like you, has done all the shows you did, and then has another life, that of a CIA agent or operative.
Killer.
Yeah, killer. He was Sonny Six killer.
That's right. I had once applied for the CIA. I was accepted up to, an FBI check was in progress, and then I got a job with ABC, which is where I really wanted to go. I had been out of work, and that thought always stuck in my head. I was never in the CIA, and I was never a killer, and all that. But I kept thinking, after these years went by, what if here's a guy who is crucified by the critics for entertaining the public, and meanwhile he's getting covert presidential citations for killing people. And this drives me or the character nuts. I just love that juxtaposition. You can.
But Chuck, Chuck, it could have happened, because after all, the dating game, the newlywed game, with all these trips you would send people on around the world, would be a great cover for an operative to get into a particular
Yes, it was.
area.
So we
it was
don't
a
know.
great cover.
Oh, he's turning the fine line here.
Chuck, you've always been a little weird, if I can say that with all great affection. Who knows?
Not
what is
weird,
the true story
creative.
here?
Well, that's the fun. Confessions is I don't think it's a book you would imagine you were going to read if you picked it up. I think you'll get, I have 20 years of stuff in there about all our shows, and it has a strange, it is a novel, it has a twist, it has a plot. But the people who work closely with me, Carruthers, my secretary, Loretta, all those people, they're the ones that don't know whether it's true.
And he did it really casually, like, yeah, of course. Yeah, of course that's fake. I just find it funny this dude writes a book called Confessions of a Dangerous Mind, where he creates this whole fictional story about how he's a CIA assassin. And then he just admits that it was all fake, that it was all made up. But that's just the kind of guy Chuck Barris was. He was loose. He was out of control. And I like that. And that's what made The Gong Show so entertaining. It was this party, Nobody took it seriously. The judges would get up from their tables and dance. And it was just about appreciating the spirit of entertainment, whether it's high entertainment or low entertainment. It was about entertainment and having a good time. And I really appreciate that. And what I also really appreciate is the remake of The Gong Show that they did recently, the reboot of it.
You're so freaking attractive.
I know a lot of people who were fans of the original Gong Show didn't like this. I've seen a lot of very confusing criticisms of it, like it sanitizes the Gong Show, it's not as crazy as it used to be. I don't know what the heck they're talking about, because I've seen the old Gong Show, I've seen the new one. Seems like people's memories are just going because like this show, this new one, It's pretty much the Gong Show. It's exactly as loose and anarchic as the original show was. And the weirdest thing about it is that the host of the new Gong Show is Mike Myers playing a character in heavy prosthetic makeup. It's in cases like these where you catch yourself asking, why? But then you realize it's the Gong Show. That's why. There's no other reason necessary. It's the Gong Show, and we do things like this on the Gong Show because it's the Gong Show. We can have it be hosted by Mike Myers in heavy prosthetics playing a British person. Why not? It certainly fits well with the tone of the show. It's basically Mike Myers doing a Gong Show act as the host of the Gong Show. But perhaps my favorite thing about this reboot of the Gong Show is that it introduced me to one of my new favorite comedians, Sethward.
I'm a walrus! You guys want to see a train?
Sethward is this slapstick comic who his gimmick is he just dresses up as different animals and plays different animal characters, and he falls around a bunch. And this guy went on the new Gong Show like 4 times as 4 different animal characters, and on America's Got Talent, he's had an even bigger presence because he goes on America's Got Talent every season and auditions for them as a different character, to the point where now he's like the patron saint of America's Got Talent. You can tell the producers absolutely love him, even if Simon Cowell doesn't. And I guess part of the joke is that this guy's talent is just so stupid that there's no way he's gonna win this show, and yet he keeps coming on every year as if he's going to win. And you gotta respect that. I recently saw a movie called Mother, which came out back in 2018, I believe. And I was interested in seeing it because I'd heard that it was really, really good. But I'd also heard that it was really, really bad. But what I found is that neither of those two opinions is right. And in fact, Mother is just all right. But it strikes me as really bizarre how people can just hate this movie so much, because it's like, what exactly is there to hate? Is it the fact that it's an uncomfortable movie? Is that it's a nightmare movie? That's a movie that's simulating a nightmare? Because that's, well, that's the whole point of the movie. The point of the movie is to make it uncomfortable and scary. So if you were scared or uncomfortable by it, I don't see why that's a criticism of the movie. But on the flip side, I can kind of understand the people who love it, but I don't really agree with them. For those of you who don't know, Mother is an allegory story. And once you understand what the allegory is, it's really not all that interesting, and it's kind of predictable, and it just kind of keeps going exactly where you're expecting it to go. And a lot of the journey on the way there is interesting, and well, it definitely simulates an experience of having a nightmare pretty well. But that's really all that the movie has going for it. I guess if there is one takeaway that I found interesting about Mother, it's this character of Javier Bardem as the god figure in the picture, and his compassion that he has for all of these horrible people who keep ruining his house. It really just makes me think about the nature of compassion and how much compassion is too much compassion. And clearly he still has a certain amount of compassion for his wife, but he doesn't have enough for her that it counteracts the compassion that he has for all of these other people. It just makes you think a bit. But I suppose the thing that I hate the most about this movie is the cinematography. I thought it had the worst cinematography I've seen in a while. And it's okay toward the end of the movie where everything is getting chaotic, but it's like Darren Aronofsky and his cameraman didn't realize that things are supposed to that the camera is supposed to get chaotic when everything else gets chaotic. So the movie starts out with this chaotic, shaky camera pointed directly at Jennifer Lawrence's face for almost the entire movie. And it's really distracting and ugly and just makes me want to stop watching it. But yeah, I have to believe that the people who hate this movie are just really bitter and unable to really appreciate film. Whereas the people who love this movie, I just don't quite understand what you're getting out of it. If you want a much better movie that is a symbolic allegory kind of movie that's surreal in certain ways, then, well, another Charlie Kaufman movie. I'm Thinking of Ending Things. That's a movie that I got into very recently. I've seen it 3 times in the last few months, and I think it's gotta be on my top 10 favorite movies by this point. I absolutely love I'm Thinking of Ending Things. So if you didn't like Mother, and you want to see a movie that kind of does a similar-ish thing that Mother did, but way better, that's what I would recommend. But I would recommend one of 2 approaches for this movie, because it might not quite grasp you the first time you watch it. I would not recommend just watching it once and then deciding what you think about it. I would either recommend reading the book first and then watching it, or watching it and then watching it again and then maybe a 3rd time before you decide whether you like it or not. Because there really is a lot to love about I'm Thinking of Ending Things. It is a very dense movie, but it is also a little bit hard to access, maybe for some people. It certainly was for me. But anyway, that's it today for the
RAB Roundup.
Getting the party blowers right is an important aspect of these videos. I'm still going to be doing that 1,000 subscriber live stream at some point. I've been putting it off because I kind of don't want to do it, because I don't like trying new things. That's something about me. I hate trying new things. But I am still going to do it at some point, so expect it at some point. Soonish. But, yeah, I guess that's it.